Stuart Bailey got thumbs up. Great. Morning. I would say welcome back, but I know we've all been grafting hard over the summer as well. So I'll change the language a little bit. Back to another exciting instalment of Policy Committee. Hopefully fairly straightforward agenda today, but we'll fly through. I will initially, if everybody is happy, just suggest that we move item number 6 to the end, because obviously there's an exempt element of that in the Freeport business case. So rather than faff residents who are no doubt watching in their droves about by going private and then back to public again, we'll move that to the end if there's no objections to that. Happy? Great. So we will crack on then with minutes of the last policy committee. Any particular thoughts or objections to the minutes? All happy? Very good. I've got a couple of substitutions and apologies here, but do group managers, leaders, business managers want to flag any apologies?
Only the change from Kate to me, that's all.
Sure.
I know you wouldn't be surprised at noticing that. But...
Noted. Jason?
Ben, Councillor Williamson substituting for Councillor Smith, who's on other council business.
Thank you. Any further apologies? Nope. Marvellous. Declarations of interest. No exciting bit done. Agenda item 4, COVID-19 update report. Obviously has been coming regularly to Policy Committee since last year and focuses on our response to the pandemic, support for adults, children, community resilience and corporate resilience within the council. There's also an element business and economic development related that is reported separately to the EDAM committee. As with previously, focuses on our work supporting vulnerable people as well as our kind of recovery work going forward. And there are particular pressures, as you might imagine, in particular service areas as we go forward. But given that things are, from a wider kind of corporate perspective, somewhat stabilised, given where we were last year, it's recommended in the report that future reports go back to the specific committees to which they are relevant rather than continuing to come here. You'll probably note or be aware of particular staffing pressures around adults and children's in particular, which are being considered by those committees anyway. And obviously, should the situation change, we are well within our rights to recall it back to Policy Committee if we wish to do so. So on that basis, and I'm sure members will want to endorse and talk about our effective service provision and how we support residents over the course of the pandemic. I'll move the recommendations on page 9. Have I got a seconder for that?
Second the recommendation and reserve my right to speak.
Thank you, Bruce. Derek, are you speaking? Have you got anything to add on the report? Or?
Thank you, Chairman. Nothing further to add to your introductory comments, but either myself or colleagues will be happy to answer any questions that members may have.
Great, thank you. Does anyone want to raise anything? Jason?
Thank you. Point 6 at the top of page 2 states that the total number of vaccinations in the county at the 31st of July is just over 1 million. But at the last Policy Committee, if you remember, I raised the link between the indices of deprivation and poor vaccination levels in places like North Nottinghamshire particularly. And I think since then we've seen a dramatic rise in positive COVID cases in places like Ashfield and Mansfield. And in fact, one point during August, Mansfield was the second highest place in the country, and Ashfield got to 7th for positive cases. And I like being top of the leaderboard but not for those reasons. And I think this clearly remains an issue with lower than average vaccination rates in areas like Mansfield and Ashfield, with up to 20% less being double vaccinated than places like West Bridgford. And since the last policy meeting, heat maps have been produced by the NHS, which backs up the initial fears that we had that places like Mansfield and Ashfield were struggling with lower vaccination levels. And we instigated a top-level meeting between Ashfield District Council's former Chief Executive, David Ainsworth at the PCT, and Sarah Carter from the CCG. And as a result, our district had 4 extra visits from the vaccination bus, 2 at the Tesco and Pigginscroft in Hucknall, the Badger Box, and in Annesley, Oval in Carswick. And it's helped, but there's clearly a lot more work still to do, and particularly in terms of communication to stop conspiracy theories, continuing social media, that sort of thing. And while it's really clear these buses are welcome. There remains a big concern, particularly I think now for 16 and 17-year-olds who cannot be or who are not allowed to be vaccinated on the COVID buses. And I think, I guess the question for me then is, what do we do as an authority to ensure that those buses are available for that age group, because they continue to have to, they're already difficult to vaccinate, and then we're asking them to travel miles away for their jabs. And if a young person without any other means of transport from Hucknall has to face a trip to QMC or Kings Mill, I just think that's something you definitely need to raise. And I'm sure I just was having a look, that this is the last report of this type back to committee, and I'm just wondering if maybe you might consider that a little bit premature, given that 2 of the districts within the county are in the top 10 consistently for COVID rates, whether we might want to just keep I'm not suggesting we're stopping looking at it, but I think a more formal look at it might still be appropriate while we're in that danger zone still. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Jason. I'll ask Anthony to come in on the specific points about the bus, if that's all right. I recognise if you've had those meetings, you'll recognise the work that's gone into trying to raise those levels. National challenge in terms of particularly demographics. But we have been working hard on that. I'll get Anthony to come in. I think on the point of reporting, no suggestion at all that we should stop reporting it, just that it should go back to specific committees. There are some quite service-specific issues, particularly around staffing and care in particular, that will probably be better scrutinised by adults or children's committee in particular. But as I say, if there are things that change or particular issues that come up, leaders of groups, if you want to flag it as something to raise a policy and you want to bring it back, come and talk to me. More than happy with that. Anthony, do you want to pick up on the specific point?
Thank you very much, Councillor Zadrozny. So I'm pleased you had the meeting with colleagues from the CCG. I've met this week with Amanda Sullivan to talk about capacity, particularly of the mobile facilities, and there is no doubt it's stretched. I'm happy to go back to Amanda again and make the points that you've made. I've also had a conversation with Amanda following conversations I've had with Councillor Jackson about ensuring that students have access to vaccinations when they come to university, particularly those that are coming for their first year. But I'm happy to go back around the loop with Amanda, pick up the specific points that you've made, because I think they're extremely important, particularly access for younger people. And as and when the government announces its intentions on 12 to 15-year-olds, it will put additional strain on the system. So I'll talk with Amanda again, and I'll drop you a note.
Anybody else wish to speak to that? Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Chair. It's regarding paragraph 36 on page 12 of the booklet. And it's about the hybrid working strategy, Chair. I note in paragraph 36 that it states that Property and Premises Recovery Group continues to meet on a weekly basis. Further to this, can I flag up comments made by the Chairman of the Economic Development and Asset Management Committee about the future of £28 million investment in Nottinghamshire programme, which is more than double the highways budget that we have in this county. He claims that after my questioning that this was under review and what the next steps will be submitted to the committee in the autumn. Could the leader please outline exactly what the process for any review and update is and what's happening so far? Who is undertaking the review, and can you give us assurance?
Dave, did you want to speak to the COVID update, because that's what we're talking about?
This is on 36. Yeah, it is. It's Property and Premises Recovery Group.
Related to
It's related to paragraph
COVID
36.
support as opposed to the investing in Nottinghamshire programme.
Yeah. Investment in Nottinghamshire, yeah. Have you read your papers, by the way, guys? And the hybrid working plan agreement, the last committee is subject to the highest scrutiny. This has been discussed at a weekly meeting. Can we find out what's exactly happening with it?
I'm sure that we can. As I say, the report touches on safe use of our council offices, making sure they're fit for purpose from that perspective, from a COVID recovery perspective. It's not about investing in Nottinghamshire plan per se, which, as you say, was picked up through the EDAM committee. So I'm sure we can have that conversation offline. I don't think it's relevant to the report unless anyone massively objects to that. We'll move on if that's all right, Dave. But I'm more than happy to have that conversation following. Mike, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. And yeah, support the report. I think there's some good detail in here. But something which has cropped up rather recently is the lack of lateral flow tests available. It's a national issue, which I think you're probably aware of, we need to be aware of. I think it ties in with what Councillor Josny spoke about being able to provide the best services that we can for responses to those that are tested positive or those that need COVID. So I think we need to have a little bit more detail as to where we are with regards to that and how we support that at all, whether it's us that are supporting schools with lateral flows or if we're opening the gateway to make sure that the lateral flow systems are available to them at tested school. And just on paragraph 16, obviously, we'll have all heard about the £10 billion deficit that is recognised from outside of the schools ministers to the schools. It would be really nice to see an update on that, to be quite honest, as to where we are. Thank you.
Anthony, did you want to come in on that?
Unfortunately, I don't think we've got a colleague from Children's Services here today, Mike, but I do know that they're working very closely with schools about the return to school and particularly the requirement for testing of secondary school pupils. I've had a conversation with government colleagues first thing this morning about the next version of the Contain framework, which we expect to be published sometime later in September, which will hopefully set the framework for the way the government will approach testing symptomatic and asymptomatic over the autumn and the winter, and their future plans for the availability of tests, free or otherwise. But I will ask Colin Pettigrew to drop you a note about what we're doing specifically to prepare schools for this current term.
Michelle.
It's with regards to paragraph 50, last line, where it says about additional government guidance is expected as schools reopen at the start of the term. Schools did receive that guidance. It was late by government standards anyway, and I know that was quite frustrating for head teachers. Within that government guidance, it quite clearly states about ventilation of classrooms. We have schools in Nottinghamshire that have no windows, unable to ventilate. The government therefore promised schools, in order to be able to open, that they would supply CO2 monitors. This hasn't happened. So schools are actually opened against the government's own guidance, but they're in a no-win situation because they haven't been supplied what they should have been supplied in order to be able to practice safely within schools. What have we done to address this? What are we doing now? And Ben, are you using all your powers possible to ensure our schools are safe, not only for pupils, but also teachers? We have a number of teachers that have gone back to school, working in schools that are actually clinically vulnerable. And it would be good if we could have a voice with regards to that. So that's my first real concern. My other concern would be, no surprise to anyone that I mentioned with regards to catch-up funding. Once again, school leaders have wrote to the Education Minister to say it's clearly not enough. If we are working what we've got with regards to catch-up funding, there is differences across the county with regards to parental capacity in terms of income. So with regards to inequalities with regards to children, how are we ensuring that those children that really need that catch-up funding are getting that catch-up funding? And do we have any say on that as a county council? I know we have a very different relationship with schools now, they are academies, but there are some big differences in inequalities across the county. And if we've only got a certain amount of funding, it's really important we get it to the children that really, really need that funding.
Sure, thanks, Michelle. On the specific issue of ventilation in our schools in Nottingham, which is not something I was aware of, I'll ask Anthony to pick up on that in a second, and we'll take that away. On the wider issue of voice around schools and education and inequalities, you rightly say, I mean, a lot of it is put out to academies as opposed to directly through us these days. So a lot of those conversations take place directly between government and academy trusts, so that we are involved in them. For my part, in terms of a voice, I met the DfE yesterday and made some similar points around catch-up and particularly inequalities in educational outcomes, obviously. So I'd say we're pushing that quite hard. I'm quite keen for the council to be more involved in the kind of social pastoral element of that. As you say, parents and families have very different capacities in terms of supporting children through the education system. So actually, various methods of us pursuing that, I think, through government. I've given the DFE some things to go and think about and things we might like to do if they will let us. And I think some of our devolution conversations actually can lead us down that route as well. It's one of the things I'd like to put on the table is, more localised funding and powers around things like youth work, for example, which was something we discussed with district leaders earlier this week as well in devolution discussions. So very much part of that conversation. Anthony, do you want to pick up on the ventilation point?
Yeah, thank you. So I will ask Colin Pettigrew to come back to you with the detail of how we're managing that relationship with our schools, particularly in terms of the advice we're giving them about ventilation, Michelle, unless we've got colleagues here that understand that better than me. I'm getting some shakes of the head behind me, so they probably don't. I'll be trying to find out where Colin is, actually. If he's available, he can come and brief on these issues this morning, but if not, we'll follow up in writing. But on the availability of guidance and CO2 monitors, as it happens, I'm on a group that has been working with the DFE about return to education. There's a meeting at 5 o'clock this evening, and I'll raise both the issues. First of all, the availability of guidance and monitors, and also the next steps in catch-up funding and how it's going to be distributed. If anything comes of that, I'll come back to you directly. But as for the local arrangements, I'll make sure that Colin drops you a note.
Jim.
Thank you. Just a couple of short questions. You may have already partially answered, but I just want some clarification. Item 37, page 12. It's just on the very last panel. The group is working with services to understand the office environment that suits their future service delivery. Is there any idea, any date when the report will be ready for that? It doesn't necessarily mean change the buildings or whatever, which has already been asked about 36. So will there be an idea of when the hybrid type of working will be available to scrutinise? Because that will bring in other issues. And just another one, which on the next page on 14, which is the recycling centres, sort of double-headed question. I'm assuming that the West Bridgeford recycling centre is going to be permanently now. You have to book in. So that's just a question. Or will that be when things go back to normal, will that go back to normal where you don't have to book in? And if we do have another big lockdown, is that capability of actually booking available to all the other centres? So it's a sort of hybrid question.
Thanks, Jim. I don't know, Dave, was that hybrid point what you were getting at? I may have not have given you enough benefit of the doubt there in terms of the question.
Well, we don't know for a fact who's going to go back into work and whether that money is going to be wasted. Yeah.
Adrian, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, thanks. I can offer some responses to that. And I understand that Colin is currently in a meeting with the DFE and DHSC discussing the very topic that's just been raised by Councillor Welsh. So that hopefully equips him with some up-to-date information with which to respond to the query. As Councillor Creamer raises, we've been working with services throughout the summer to understand their particular business needs so that we can make sure that we translate the hybrid working policy, which was agreed by Policy Committee back in July, into action in a way that most meets their particular service requirements. We've prioritised those services that were flagged as being most critical in terms of having access back to their office spaces. So that's tended to be within the adults and children's social care teams. And in fact, this isn't about generating a report as such. This is about us continually rolling out the adaptations that they need. So we've been through Sir John Robinson House and have made changes to that building, and indeed are now rolling out across a number of other buildings, and expect mostly to be complete across the estate by late October. So that speaks to changing of layouts, introducing new technology, equipping meeting rooms with the kind of hybrid meeting tech, using things like modern versions of the device you can see in the chamber and so on. Speaking to the wider point on investing in Nottinghamshire, there is a strand of work that Councillor Girling and a number of other members are engaged in, which is reviewing the form and nature of the office accommodation we'll need across the entirety of the estate, recognising that we have some 7,500 or so members of staff who work directly for the County Council. And even though we've been in lockdown, a significant number of our employees continued to use not just offices, but of course service buildings throughout the pandemic. But of course, we want to make sure that any investment we do make in either the renewal or provision of office and service estate is fit for purpose, not just for today, but into the future. And I'm sure Councillor Girling will be bringing a report to the relevant committee in the autumn.
I think it's worth noting that we did put in place when we initially agreed the hybrid working plan, that there was a 6-month review built into that. We'll come back and look at that again. Did you want to speak to that particular point, Keith?
Yeah, if I could, Chairman, please. Yeah, I thought I covered this in my response to Councillor Shaw's question at full council, but that's why we're doing the review, because we understand that actually most people might not want to go back how they have been before COVID. So we're looking at how we're going to do the hybrid system. I think it's going out now to officers to find out what their responses are to that, what they think they would like to work under conditions wise. And then when we get all that information back, we can then look at what estate we actually need to function as a council. But as Adrian said, we've got to look not just for now, though, we have got to look for 25 years odd into the future. So there's a finger in the air bit about it. So it's not going to be absolutely precise, but it's going to be as accurate as we can get it to make sure that the staff that work for this council can function properly in appropriate accommodation where they're safe and they can get on with their job. And that's what we'll be looking to do. And that's why it's under review.
Thanks, Keith. I think Colin has joined us. Derek, I don't know if you can come back to Jim on the recycling centre point. And then what I'll do is go back a question and see if Colin can answer some of Michelle's, if that's right.
Councillor Crimmett, as far as West Bridgford Household Waste Recycling Centre is concerned, yes, there's a booking arrangement in place. It's been in place now since the autumn of last year. And now that we're in a slightly different place as far as COVID is concerned, because of course it was put in place for that purpose, the intention is that we'll take a look at through the autumn as to whether it's still necessary, because obviously we've got to balance public safety with the need to ensure that our facilities are as widely available to the public as possible. And there are some compromises that are required from a booking scheme in terms of access. During the autumn of last year, we also looked at every other site in terms of customer flows and access issues. In terms of whether it was appropriate to institute booking arrangements in any of the others. And that wasn't the conclusion we came to then. Should the situation change during the autumn or the winter, then of course that's something that we'd look at on a site-by-site basis. But we haven't seen the challenges in other sites quite to the same extent that we've seen in West Bridgford.
Thank you, Derek. Anthony, could you just remind us of the questions for Colin's benefit, and then I'll go to him. Can you hear us, Colin? Are you?
I can, thank you, leader. Yes.
Great, Anthony. Can you fill us in?
Okay. Good morning, Colin. Thanks for joining us. And if you wouldn't mind staying for the SEND item that follows this one, please, that would be helpful. So, Colin, we've had some questions from members on the COVID update report in respect of return to schools. There was one question about whether we are satisfied with the availability of LFT tests so that children in secondary schools can be tested in line with the government's expectations. The second one was about whether we're satisfied that our schools are safe in terms of their physical environment, specifically in respect of ventilation, and whether we've been able to work with schools to implement the government guidance, especially around schools that do not have natural ventilation but should have CO2 monitors. And then finally, there was a question about whether we're satisfied the arrangements to distribute catch-up funding track deprivation and will get to the children and young people that need it most.
Okay, so there's 3 questions, and thank you, Anthony and Leader. I was following those questions on the live streaming, so thank you for the questions from Councillor Welsh. I will know certainly more later this morning because I'm joining, I think, as Adrian Smith has shared with committee, Department for Education and DHSC colleagues a little bit later this morning to discuss both those issues of ventilation and vaccination. Government has made an announcement that they will be procuring ventilation CO2 monitors for every school. My understanding is that those monitors have not been distributed anywhere to date, but will come, I'm told, or we believe, later in September. The school returns are, to a great extent, very similar to the return of school previously. During COVID, they'll be doing 2 tests per week during September. And then in the school settings, that's in secondary settings, and then beyond September, children and young people will be provided tests themselves, and will be encouraged to do that twice a week throughout the term. Is our understanding. We are, I think, Anthony, I think you alluded to expecting an announcement at some point from GVCI with regards to vaccinations for healthy 12 to 15-year-olds. Children who've got underlying health conditions of that age have been able to access vaccination to this point through a conversation between their GP and their parents, and coming to a view that the vaccination is or isn't more or less beneficial to them. But this is for children who don't have an underlying health condition, and described in the guidance we understand as being healthy 12 to 15-year-olds. You will imagine that that means, for instance, that some Year 7 pupils will be within that age bracket. Some Year 7 pupils won't be at the start Year 7 in their 11th year, and it become 12 during that year. And that level of detail are the questions, for instance, that we'll be trying to gain answers to later this morning. With regards to catch up, the schools are leading that, and they know their pupils and their communities best. Councillor Welsh mentioned the inequity or inequality with regards to levels of deprivation, and that is reflected in, for instance, the Pupil Premium Plus money, and schools attract additional funding, based upon Pupil Premium and free school meal eligibility. We've seen the number of pupils eligible for free school meals rise by 2,000 or 3,000 during this period, and schools will attract that additional funding, which will help them towards the catch-up arrangements.
Thanks, Colin. Worth probably flagging, you mentioned vaccines there. 2 significant questions for government to answer in the next few weeks. One around 12 to 15-year-olds and the other about if and when booster jabs might need to be available to the wider population, as well as just elderly and clinically vulnerable people, which we'd expect to get answers to both in the next few weeks. As Anthony says, Colin, if you could hang around for the SEND one, just in case there's any queries there, that'd be really helpful. I had Neil next.
Thanks, Chairman. I was going to answer about the recycling, so that's been dealt with. Thank you.
And Gordon.
Likewise, but just to get a bit of clarity on that one, if I may, Leader, just a bit of clarity on that one, because Councillor Creamer very gratefully raised it, but he referred to as the West Bridgford Recycling Centre. It's not. It's a Rushcliffe Recycling Centre, which for my sins happens to be located in my division. So, as you can imagine, I get a lot of flack about it when there isn't a booking system. Now, I totally understand. I've had a very constructive discussion already with Councillor Clark of the need to save money, of course. And there's a very good, so we need to look at what we're paying for, what we're getting value for money, and how we can do things differently. But one misunderstanding might be that we had the booking system largely because of COVID. Well, the problem, it existed in the recycling centre long before COVID, because the weekend you couldn't get down Rugby Road. Well, I personally had to go all the way around Wilford Lane because it was a nightmare trying to get down that road. So I don't want anyone to think the problems we had simply because of the COVID factor. It's not. It was a problem that existed before the COVID. And we do need a resolution. Jim, you're absolutely right. Of course we need a resolution. As I said, I have a very constructive discussion with Neil already, and there will be further dialogue on this one as we go forward. Thank you, Leader.
Great, thanks, Gordon. Elizabeth.
Thank you. Paragraph 18 of the report refers to the COVID local support grant that was used to provide supermarket vouchers to all school-aged children claiming free school meals and for younger children from low-income families accessing funded childcare. Free school claimants have rocketed since the start of the pandemic. In March 2020, there were 22,176 free school meal claimants. As of July 2021, there were 24,178. These are according to the figures Notts County Council used for the purpose of the free school meal vouchers for school holiday periods. This is an alarming rise of 5,117 free school meal claimants since the start of the pandemic. My question is about the amount of children accessing funded childcare places for children 2 years old to 4 years old. How many families received vouchers who are in receipt of funded childcare places? If you take the figure, the total number of free school meal claimants, and compare it to the 27,174 families who received vouchers, that leaves 2,996 pupils. Is this figure correct? Was the take-up of free school meal vouchers 100% for all those who qualified, or were there any issues regarding this? Thank you.
Thank you. Colin, I don't know whether you'd be best placed to chip in on that, whether there's a gap between eligibility around free school meals and free early years education places.
Yeah, I'd certainly thank you, Leader, and I will come back with a written response to that question with regards to the detail. Yeah, but it is the case that we were offering free school meal vouchers to all families who were eligible. Yeah, it may be that some families took a decision not to take those that offer up, but I'll come back with a written response.
Thanks, Colin. I appreciate it. It's challenging when the specific figures they're thrown at you. So that would be helpful, I think. Anyone else wishing to speak to this report? Bruce, did you want to come back as a second? No? Happy. In which case, put those recommendations to the vote. All in favour? That will be carried. Thank you very much. Move on to special educational needs place planning strategy. So this report lays out some of the challenges and our proposals around expansion of school places. Obviously hugely important within our remit and responsibilities to support children with special educational needs. So restating, of course, our commitment to deliver on that. We have since 2017, I remember Councillor Owen often refers to he and I going down to Westminster and securing additional funding around this, but the cost of providing these places has increased even more than the 49% additional funding that we've had since 2017, so it continues to be a challenge and a pressure. But this report lays out our plans to identify up to 490 additional places, which will no doubt be very welcome. I know Councillor Taylor is going to propose this. I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
Thank you, Chair. I think it is just important that we're really clear on the growth in need for or demand for places. Over 5 years from 16 to 21, the number of specialist places has grown by 40%. The high needs block budget itself has grown by 49.3%, but the cost of the places has grown by 61.7%. So, we're in no doubt about the pressures that are on the budget. The pressures that are on the demand for places. We are working very hard to meet those needs. The policy that you're about to consider was actually agreed by Children and Young People's Committee at the meeting in July. One of the recommendations at that committee was that I, as chair, should write to the Minister again, making our case for further funding and being very clear and strident about exactly what pressures the current policy has led to for us. And this is a national picture, so that that is another action that we are taking. So happy to take questions later, Chair, obviously, but happy to move the recommendation on page 19. Thank you.
Thank you. Have I got a seconder for that?
Yeah, formally second and reserve my right to speak.
It's worth noting from feeding into that conversation and writing to government that off the back of a select committee report that I sat on a couple of years ago, government's doing a wider SEND review at the minute. What was probably a well-intentioned system that hasn't worked quite as we would hope, with all sorts of consequences of that. So that's under review nationally as well. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to the report, Colin, before we go to questions, or if you're happy to just wait and see what people want to ask if you are there.
I'm happy to go to questions. Thank you, Leader.
Thanks, Colin. Does anyone want to speak to this particular item? Mike.
Thanks, Chairman. Page 29, really, in table 1, again referencing what Councillor Taylor's already mentioned with regards to budgeting. And if we recognise the challenges of funding, then obviously we have to recognise difficulties in budget setting because of this. And I was glad to hear that Councillor Taylor mentioned a letter that had gone to government previously. Can I suggest that we write as a cross-party council to government? Because again, we are languishing at the bottom of this, 30 million behind some of the other counties. And I think this ties in with what you've said, Leader, with regards changes that are being made. It ties in with what Councillor Taylor's mentioned, and I certainly think we need to be on form with getting the right funding for Nottinghamshire so that we can alleviate some of the pressures of budget. Not that the challenges are away, we recognise that. But I propose that if we're in agreement that we write a letter asking government to review the funding that we presently get.
Thanks, Mike. I think we need to be making the case as vociferously as we can, and we're happy to have a conversation with you about language and draft something up. I'm happy to do that. Colin, would you be able to come back a little bit around the funding and some of the challenges perhaps there?
Yes, thank you. And the funding is undoubtedly a challenge, and we're seeing the demand for supporting pupils with the additional need or high needs increasing, both in that they're accessing early years education and staying on education longer. So it's not just that the volume is growing, the period of time that children and young people are accessing special educational needs is beginning in nursery and ending in sixth form and college, more frequently. The funding formula, we have lobbied hard for it to be reviewed. That's seen our budget increase from less than £60 million to more than £90 million in a matter of a few years. That's narrowed the gap between ourselves and other local authorities quite significantly. But there is still that gap, and I think it's right that we continue the pressure to the Department for Education regarding a fairer funding deal for our children with additional needs. Just to explain a little about how we reach that position with regards to the difference, is that the funding formula relies less heavily, but still heavily, upon historic spend. And because we have got a proud and successful history of inclusion within our mainstream schools, and a lack of reliability on the more expensive residential independent sector of schools, then that the funding formula, which has a historic element, is punitive, financially punitive to that effect. Our budget position is under some stress with regards to the dedicated school grant, high needs block. It is a ring fence grant, that can only be used in this area, but it would be accurate to say, in the work of county council networks, for instance, but it would be accurate to say that our funding position is less challenged than many other of the local authorities. So, for instance, Kent, where you can see in table 1 on page 29 of 84, whilst they have got a significantly higher needs block grant and higher needs block grant per capita by by population. They're forecasting a budget overspend somewhere in the region of 60 million for 21-22. Our forecast pressure is in the single figures of millions. We expect somewhere in the region of £2 to £3 million, but that will then be offset against the dedicated school grant for 22-23.
Thanks, Colin. Worth noting, obviously, wider pressures around children's budget as a whole. Obviously, significant scrutiny of that as we go into budget conversations in the coming months as well. I have asked Colin and his team to go away and look at what additional work we can do, what investor save propositions there might be, and we'll have those conversations through those budget conversations too, no doubt. I've got Dave next on the list.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Draw members' attention to Appendix 1, top of page 8. It reveals the disparity across the county of children's special educational needs and disabilities, which continue to be higher in poorer parts of the county. And I refer especially to Ashfield and Hucknall. It reveals that according to the school census carried out in January 21 this year, that Ashfield is 11.9% of all children and young people receive SEN support, while Rushcliffe receive 5.6% of the children and young people receive similar support. That's why I wholeheartedly welcome this aspirational draft document here from Councillor Taylor. Appendix 1 also goes on to say that there's a special new school for up to 75 places to cover Hucknall and Allerton. Could Councillor Taylor please, or is she able to provide the committee with an update of where we are with the feasibility study as the figures back up the need that we are needing these places, or are we just waiting for logistics to cover the site costs and things like that? Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. I think it's worth, I'm grateful that you welcome the report. I think it's worth noting that despite the financial challenges, we are in a position to plan for and provide additional places, which is good news and something positive to take away. It's worth saying from a Mansfield and Ashfield perspective, because from the DfE's point of view, there is an additional interest and funding and other things around education that come from Mansfield and Ashfield as one of their kind of place development areas in terms of school quality and other things. And I spoke to the DfE yesterday, who told me that they are going to provide additional support around SEND, particularly to Mansfield and Ashfield, with extra support, training and support for people like Senkos within schools for Academy Trust, and they're putting that together at the minute, which should be a good place-based intervention for those particular areas. I don't know if you want to come back on the schools point or whether Colin's best place to answer, Tracy.
I was going to ask either Colin or perhaps Matt as property colleague to actually speak on that in particular, because what we're talking about is where we are in process in terms of assessments and feasibility. So I think Matt's probably in a better position to actually speak on where we are to date.
Matt, can I come to you then?
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, so just to say that if you note Appendix 5B, details and potential work required, we're currently underway with the ground investigations for a site, and that's underway, and hopefully in the next month or so we're going to be reporting back on the outcome of that, and then progressing through the design development stage and taking that through the appropriate committee.
Thanks, Matt. Glyn.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, mine actually is in relation to Appendix B, but also relates to what you said earlier about Mansfield. Bassetlaw is in a similar position to that, and I would hope that you would actually raise the issue with the DfE to see what other assistance can be given in Bassetlaw. There are a number of young people with special educational needs who are not in education and are being diverted into other areas. And in reality, I know that the academy in works at the secondary level has recognised that you know there is an issue for them. In reality, you know, they can't keep either expelling because of, say, behavioural issues, or saying, well, we can't cope. You know, there's something's got to be done. And it just refers to the where it says a potential satellite centre, and Tracy will know. You know, North Leatherton is identified as a possible satellite, but it is a distance away from the centre, and I just have a bit of a air a concern that sometimes kids with special educational needs have difficulties in travelling as well, but also there is a cost to that, and it's in particular travel costs and transport costs, and that is a bit out on a limb. And if you're talking about 60 placements, you're talking a lot of travel, support that the idea and the ethos that we need to look at, and we need to identify places, see the sense around trying to use a facility that we already own and not looking at new. But I just have that concern that Leverton is a bit of out on a limb, and it's one of the difficulties that we have in Bassetlaw, that the travelling from A to B, it's not too central. We've got 2 towns, 2 major towns, and then a lot of distance. Although that could be looked at.
Thanks.
And
Lynn.
also some real work around, and I know I've spoken with Colin previously about the issue in Bassetlaw and the secondary schools, and I've also spoken to the chief executive, of the trust, and he said he was really interested in looking at that particular side. And I don't know whether there's a partnership opportunity with them to look at a special school with them leading on that.
Okay, thanks, Lynn. I know Tracy wants to come back on that in a second, pick up on some of that. I think it's worth saying, obviously mentioned Mansfield, Nashfield specifically, only because, well, not even, more from a government perspective, on the basis that they did an assessment nationally of school outcomes and picked, I think, 4 places across the country where there was additional investment in trying to improve school outcomes through working with Academy Trusts in particular, Mansfield and Nashfield being one of them, which is why there's that additional intervention. But quite right that all the challenges exist elsewhere, of course, as well, and the wider financial problem, as well as touching on, the kind of national review. There is a real challenge and unintended consequences of some of the policy as it exists, both in terms of schools' actions off-rolling and other issues, kids not in education because of just the complexities of the system, which can be quite combative as well. And all these things are elements that have been picked up on a national level as part of the SEND review. So all of that is very much under discussion. And as I say, having sat through many months of select committee report on the subject, it's something I'm particularly interested in. So both I personally and I know Colin is feeding into that national conversation as well. Tracy, did you want to come back on the school point?
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, I don't know which trust you've been in conversation with, and we obviously have schools across both primary and the secondary phase, so places needed for different age groups. There's kind of a fundamental dilemma with the travel question, in that short of having a private tutor in every home, you're always going to have the question of who travels from east to west, north to south, whatever it is. And of course, children are coming into and out of the system all the time, so you haven't got a static market either. That will change over time. So wherever you have a base at one point, there will always be travel from somewhere else to actually access it. So I suppose the only assurance I can give in the first instance is that the travel budget conversation is always also a part of any other planning. So although the Leverton site might be referenced at the minute, it doesn't mean it's the only focus, and the conversation will be wider. So those elements are actually being captured in the conversations that are being had. I think there's also the question that you referenced about children who are no longer necessarily still in schools, particularly in the academised sector, which is principally secondary, who are either choosing or being encouraged to seek alternative education. That's a recognised problem. It's something that Councillor Owen fought against very vocally throughout all of his time in this role, and which I'll continue to do. There is alternative provision. Some of the academy chains choose to engage with it, some do not. And without wanting to be too specific, I can offer a partial reassurance that the conversations are being had specifically in Worksop and have been more engaging lately. So I'm optimistic that we might actually have a live conversation there about improving what access children who are not suited to mainstream provision because of complex needs are actually getting better care, actually through the academies, hopefully, in terms of alternate provision. So I suppose all I'm really trying to say is none of the things that you are asking about are outside the conversations that we are having, and we are continuing to press to improve the circumstances. And I'm happy to have those conversations with you or with colleagues outside, as I would with, Councillor Welsh, who's on the Children's Committee, and with Kate, and with, I think, Councillor Callaghan is also on the committee. Sorry, I'm looking at Errol back in the room. It's nice to see you. So happy to have those conversations with colleagues, but to reassure you that none of the things that you are raising have not already been raised, and we are not exploring as best we can.
Thanks, Tracy. That's very helpful. Michelle.
Caught me still writing my notes then. A couple of things really. Having previously worked within SEN, the challenges with the budgets have been long standing. With regards to how those are funded and how those aren't funded. So I'm well aware that whatever I say now is not necessarily a criticism. It is the fact that we know that this has been an ongoing situation for a long time. I wanted to place on record my support for the locality model that's mentioned within this report. I do feel like we're going back round in a circle again, because I was part of somebody that established locality models previously, working specifically with SEN provision not so long ago. So I feel like we're going round in a circle a little bit. But yeah, I'm really supportive of the locality model and would love to see how that's going to pan out. And if I could be involved or help in any way, I'd really would appreciate that. With regards to the budget, just to say that I do support what Councillor Pringle was saying with regards to, I think we need a concerted effort with this council, that we need to not waste any time with regards to it. We need to be saying to government, we clearly don't get enough funding for SEN, and I think it needs to start with a joint letter to government as soon as possible with regards to that, as Councillor Pringle outlined. My question with regards to the SEN funding is, in past years, we've had to go back to the schools group and ask for funding to top up our SEN funding because we've not had enough to do what we've needed to do. And I know the last time the conversation with the head teachers was not necessarily difficult, but there was it was a bit more than what would normally be asked for. And correct me if I'm correct, if I'm wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. I'm just wondering whether we're going to have to go back to schools again to ask for that top slice, whether that's still going to have to happen, or is this report being open and transparent and saying we're going to be absolutely fine in the next financial year with our SEN funding? I'm quite a favour with the budget, and I've looked and I've got a little bit of a different perspective, but I'm happy to be proven wrong and be told wrong today with regards to it. But yeah, I'd be interested to know whether schools are going to be expected to support the budget again. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm sure that offer of support and input would be very welcome, particularly to the committee and a conversation with Tracy, I'm sure, in the first instance. I'll ask James in the ether in my office, if he's listening, to get in touch with Kate and Mike following this meeting to agree. He's over there. He's not even in the ether. About formalising something there in terms of wording and writing. I'm happy to do that. So we can go from there. I know Tracy, you've got your hand up, and I might come back to Colin as well around the particular top-up funding.
So at the risk of getting myself into trouble, Chair, I will just make the point that at the last Children and Young People's Committee, the recommendation was agreed that I would write to the Minister, have a copy of that letter in my hand. So that has gone from me as Chair of Young People's Committee, which is what was agreed. So I suppose I'm just asking the question, is it appropriate to immediately do another joint letter, or do we see what response we get back and then take another step of, depending on that response, saying, OK, we want the right to reply in a joint fashion. So I'm just suggesting we don't necessarily just confetti the Minister with letters. On the specific point about the top slicing of the school's budget, no, there's nothing that is not transparent here, and part of my really direct comment to the Minister is that we are looking at a potential overspend around £2 million, and in order to address that, we may potentially need to ask the Schools Forum to top slice the other budget. That is not what we want to do, which is the very reason for me asking in very explicit terms for money directly to us to deal with that. because we're talking about projections at the moment. We're talking about projected overspends given what we're seeing as demand coming into the system. And if those are the demand levels that we're looking at and they are the potential risks to our budget, then Councillor Welsh is quite correct. We might have to ask for top slicing of the other budget as we have in the past, and that is not what we want to do. It is also not sustainable. No, not sustainable for us as a council, not sustainable for our schools in this area. They cannot take the cut to their budgets in order to support what is an underfunded stream, which we clearly recognise already.
Thanks, Tracy. Yeah, I think on the letter point, I'm more than happy to take a joined up approach. I think the point you raise and the reason I've not said let's vote on it now and add it is precisely that reason, that just we need to think through the best probably way of doing that. I think, we're happy to do things jointly, but it's probably an appropriate time and way to do that, along with my own conversations with ministers too. But we'll take that.
I never want to stand on Councillor Taylor's toes at all in moving letters, but we look at the lead table again. We find ourselves bottom. So irrespective of efforts that any of us doing, anybody looking at the table bottom, well, we don't need to be there. We really don't need to be there. So and apologies, I didn't realise you'd already written a letter. But in the openness, in the subject of openness and transparency and working together, surely a cross-party, and I would include all members, to support this for everybody if we can, and tie in with Councillor, and gladly, you can lead on the letter, whatever. But I think it's important that we have full cross-party. Sort of demands, really. I think we're getting to that point now. For what I mean, we applauded Councillor Owen for getting £10 million previously. Well done, but it still hasn't moved us off the bottom. So if it had 100 million, then we'd be at the top. So that's what we need to be aiming for, 100 million. Yeah. So
we can all aspire.
Thank you.
I think let's have that conversation, and we'll no doubt have spending review proposals to put into government as well over the coming months. Colin, was there anything you wanted to add on top of what Tracy has said?
Yes, if I may, Leader, and just for members who aren't au fait with the arrangements that both Councillor Welsh and Councillor Taylor have been referring to, the school finances and the dedicated school grants, which are in 3 tranches. There's the schools block, which is more than £500 million a year. There's then the dedicated school grant for additional needs, which you're considering, which you're referring to today, of 91 million, and then there's the early years block as well. All those things are managed through the school forum, which is a representative group of head teachers, early years leaders, and including head teachers from special schools. Officers support that forum, but we don't have any voting on the forum. The forum make their own decisions. The arrangements that Councillor Welsh was referring to happened on one occasion, or was agreed on one occasion in a year, probably 3, if not 4 years ago, where if we wish to top slice up to 0.5% of the dedicated schools block into another block, i.e. in this occasion the additional needs, we can do that with the school forum agreement. So it's in their decision making to do that. On that occasion, the school forum agreed. The following year, we went and asked them for that again, and they agreed, but more reluctantly, I think would probably be the best way of agreeing that. But there was a majority to do that. But in the end, we didn't need to do that because of the prudent arrangements of our arrangements to that budget. We are just in the midst of working through the budgets for 22-23 of the dedicated school grant, and we may have to ask the school forum again for that, but that's not fully decided. By way of assurance around the capital project, Leader, it would be wrong for me not to mention we've got a proud record of delivering high quality schools in the special educational needs school. The Orchard School is the latest, but prior to that we replaced Fountaindale, we totally refurbished Carlton Digby, and we replaced much of Ashley School. So we do we have a proud record of capital investment in our special schools, and that investment then being followed by outstanding provision. And Carlton Digby was inspected in the summer term of last year and was found to be outstanding across every single domain of the Ofsted judgment. So I can reassure councillors that if they agree to this capital strategy, what we will deliver is good value for money, outstanding capital infrastructure, and outstanding results for our children and young people in special educational need provision.
Thanks, Colin. We're saying, a really good record of investment in our education, capital investment and infrastructure as a whole. I've got Keith and Jim, and then I intend to move on unless anyone has a burning desire, because we've been talking about this for quite a while. Welcome to you first, Keith.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I think it's important that in terms of reassuring the committee that it's not just a children and young people's services problem, and that the EDAM committee are very much engaged with the children and people's services in terms of what we're going to provide, or what we can provide, or what we're going to try and provide, and all the things that wrap around that, really, in terms of travel to and from, etc. So I think it's about reassurance, really, and to add that actually there's been a bit of a dream team set up between Children and People's Services, Adult Social Care and Health, and EDAM in terms of looking at the whole provision of both services across the county. And looking at where the gaps are and where we can fill those gaps. So, we are doing a whole county approach to this, and we're looking at every aspect of it, and then hopefully we'll come up with a good solution that we can provide the SEN services that Nottinghamshire deserves. So it's just a reassurance thing, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. It's just a question on page 46. The new schools, proposed new build schools, no problem with that, but quite a few of them underneath September 2024 don't have any dates attached. Is that an assuming that all the dates underneath are September 24, or are they variable?
Looking at it, I would guess that we're not delivering all of those in September 24. Colin will no doubt be able to confirm.
That's correct. Yeah.
I assume that's because we don't yet have a date. But we'll be
so in the future, will there be some sort of indication or guesstimate when they would actually be available?
Yeah, I think we can just note it from a report perspective, we could make that a little bit clearer in future reports. Happy to do that. Right, with that, so unless anyone else has burning desire or something new, we'll move on. You're free, Colin. Thank you for joining us at short notice.
Good. Thank you, Leader, and apologies.
No problem. Thank you. All in favour of, do you want to say anything, Bruce, as a seconder before? No. All in favour of that report. Thank you very much. Right, East Midlands Freeport outline business case. We're going to do that at the end. So we'll move on to development of the council plan. Obviously, report to update members on how our plan is developing, and particularly our public engagement, which we've had a lot of conversation about in various fora within the council. Pleased to be able to say that we are already at a stage where we've had the highest level of engagement certainly anybody can remember for any of these types of engagement within the county council. Over 7,000 responses from our survey, as well as additional responses from business, face-to-face interviews, and I've asked comms colleagues to have a look at our wider engagement as well. Obviously, we've posted surveys out to hundreds of thousands of residents. We've had, I would guesstimate, several 100,000 engagements on the likes of social media and whatever as well. So we are working very hard to push it out, and there's still a few weeks left to go. So I'd encourage colleagues to continue to promote that both online, and there are paper copies of things if you want to go and leave them on people's desks or do whatever you suggest with them. In the background, obviously, and I'm sure Councillor Lawton will be able to talk about this more, work going on to pull together the wider kind of vision, and the response from those surveys will feed into that. and be tested against that, both residents and wider partners across business and the public sector, of course, as well. I know members will be keen to support as pulling together that plan. So I'll move the recommendations on page 3. Are you moving the recommendations on page 3, Bruce? And I'll ask somebody to second that.
Yeah, I formally second it. Shall I speak?
Yeah, welcome to speak to
it. Yeah, I'm sort of like, I drew the short straw and I'm in charge of the preparing the forward plan. We are obviously, and I'm involved with a small select group doing the Big Knots survey. We've had phenomenal response, really. We're really pleased with the number of responses we've had back. And so my thanks to all members, really, who have been pushing the Big Knots survey. As the leader has already pointed out, we've got till the 19th of September, but I've also got a couple of dates put in the diary for Parish Council stroke Town Council engagement, which are past that date. I think it's the 20th and 26th, if I'm remembering, one at County Hall and one up in Worksop, which I'll be chairing. So to give those parish councils opportunity to be able to have more of a say. It's important to what we're doing is we're dovetailing the forward plan. We are writing the forward plan. We're engaging with opposition groups as well within this process, but we're dovetailing it in with the Big Knots survey, and we'll benchmark and look at the surveys and the responses from the surveys to make sure that we're covering off a number of the issues that are brought forward by members of the public. Obviously we have to come up with the strapline, but the strapline is a healthy, prosperous and greener future. And I think within that, we're already picking up on some of the stuff that's coming through, some of the things that are happening within the council, the greener bit. We're looking at the debate we had at full council on climate emergency, and also some of the health stuff as well. You'll also be picking up on the next full council the motion coming in front of you on the healthier Nottinghamshire. So I think it's important that we're seen to be listening, really, and we are listening to what people are telling us, and that we're not. That this is not top down. This is bottom up. Just finish, really. I'd just like to put on record, really, my thanks to the team. And also, really, the overall council. We've had a phenomenal response back from staff who are wanting to have their say, which I think was really important to us. And it's really important we listen to those messages that are coming back through them. And a lot of the engagement that we've been doing hasn't come from us as elected members. It's come through our staff who have come up with, in fact, too many good ideas, I think it can be said. And so, and some of which we haven't, had the resource or the wherewithal to run with them. But we are doing our best to cover every available stakeholder. And that sort of like finishes off really my point that it's very important to us, all our stakeholders and our partnership groups and organisations that we work with. And we are listening very closely to their story and what they're telling us. Thank you, Leader.
Thanks, Bruce. And worth adding, I think, as we go forward, and I've asked Bruce and Derek and his team to make sure this is the start of an ongoing two-way conversation with the residents, and that we are going back to those residents who have submitted to the survey, that we're going back to tell them what we're doing with what information they've given us and how this develops, how it's utilised in the future. If we're going to bring ourselves as an authority closer to our communities, I think that two-way engagement is important, not just that, we always get the criticism that people submit ideas and views into consultations and never hear anything ever again. I don't want us to be in that place. So there's a long-term piece of work to be done here as well. Derek, I don't know if there's anything you want to add before I open it up. Or?
Thank you, Chairman. Just to stress, to build on your comments and those of Councillor Lawton, to say that the purpose of this report really is to enable us to build on that really positive public engagement that we've had over the last few weeks and which is continuing, to layer up on that a really positive partner engagement process as well, so we can marry the views of our residents and all of our many partner organisations as well, and synthesise those into the council plan. But happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Derek. Does anyone want to speak to this particular point? Jason.
Thanks, Ben. An awful lot of backslapping going on here, which is not yet deserved as far as I'm entirely concerned. Looking at the report figures, which are slightly different to the figures you've just given, so there's been some 900 odd extra ones. Looking at that, the £50,000 cost is roughly £8 per response. And in the report, it says that it constitutes a strong appetite for residents to say. I'm not sure 0.7% response is a strong appetite. And I don't want to talk it down, but I just think it's so important. We had the previous debate about how important it was to have this engagement and genuinely seek people's views, so that you could formulate your plans. And at that time, we made all sorts of offers. I said at the previous meeting when we discussed this that you could get in touch with Ashfield's comms, because we got over 11,000 responses just in Sutton and Kirkby for our Towns Fund proposals. You haven't had that across this entire county. And I checked with our comms team. There's been no communication, not any at all. They were emailed from your comms team, just asking them to forward the social media link. That's it. And there's only been one, council staff have only been emailed once as well. So, and I think we've had the imprint stuff is literally only in libraries. We posted out a leaflet to every house in the county, but it didn't have the survey on it. It just had a link to follow to the survey in it. It was such a missed opportunity. And I guess that's the disappointment, I think, because it could have been significantly better if the offers that had come out when we first had this discussion had been followed up. And the only other thing I've got a question for, because it is what it is now, I'll be amazed if we get to 10,000. I think that'll be disappointing. It might well be the best the county's ever done. That doesn't mean it's good enough. We also asked in the previous meeting how detailed the data could get. It might have been in that meeting, it might have been in a private meeting with Anthony, but we asked how detailed the data could get. So what analysis for demographics, for districts, for or maybe even at ward level, so you could see or a hotspot where responses were coming from, and that's not here yet. And I'm hopeful that once that cogitates back through, that we can have a much more detailed analysis of where and what type of responses are coming back from across the county, because if they're clearly different in different places, we probably need to differentiate policies. But that's my 2 pence for what it's worth. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. I think there could always be things that are better, or not very often as a county council we pull this kind of exercise together, and then we know about many things to learn from at the end of it. I'm optimistic that there is more to come, particularly from some of the further engagement we've still got to do, and there's still 3 weeks left. I will come over to Derek in a second. I think it's worth noting your points about engagement with districts in particular, because we have talked about that a lot in here. So I'd be interested to know what we've done on that score as well. Very keen to utilise all of our partners, stakeholders, kind of community engagement and things as well. One of the things we've talked about in this meeting, I think last time, was about the need to work more closely with those partners in particular, but how actually I think sometimes the county feels more distant from communities than our districts do, perhaps for obvious reasons, because many of our services are hidden from that point of view. But therefore we need to have that engagement through districts as well. So I hope we have, and if we haven't, then we've still got 3 weeks to. On the point about data and mapping, I think the next policy committee will have more detail on that. But I don't know if there's anything in response to Jason's points there, Derek.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Zadrozny. So as far as contact with district council is concerned, we have made initial contact with our district partners to encourage them to support the distribution of the survey. If there's more that we can do, and obviously that's the suggestion that you're making, then we can follow that up directly with district councils through our comms colleagues. As far as the kind of data breakdown, if you like, of the demographics relating to the resident survey is concerned, we absolutely will be able to cut the data down to a local level. I think there'll always be a question about how we then share that with committee and with members, because there's always layer upon layer upon layer of detail with all of that. But we'll try and find a way to share that at an appropriate level in our future reports to committee. We'll also have to think about how we can share that then with individual members as well, so that you're better sighted on what responses look like at a very local level. But we should be able to do that. It's worth saying as well that in addition to the public kind of open access survey, we're also undertaking, I think it's 1,000 structured face-to-face surveys as well, which will be statistically valid, so that they'll have an appropriate demographic and geographical spread across the county. And that will be an important, reliable underpinning to all of the broader residents' feedback that we get as well. And again, we should be able to kind of build that into the feedback that we give to members. But I would say that with a number of weeks still to go with the engagement process and quite a lot of further additional comms work that we're going to do through our various channels, including a significant email, I think next week, to all of our email me recipients, then we're still confident that we'll get some significant movement on that initial number of around about 7,000 responses as of this morning.
Thanks, Derek. Can I just, I guess, reiterate and underline that point then, because we sat in policy committee last time we were here talking about particularly working with districts and their resources. Jason talks about 11,000 email addresses. I know Newcastle have got similar. So in an ideal world, it should be going out through all of their channels as well. And if we can work with them and encourage them to do that over the next few weeks, that would be very helpful. I've got Mike next.
Thanks, Chairman. And just to recognise actually what Jason said, but to reiterate, because Keith stole my thunder, because you allowed him to say that Newcastle got 14,000 responses, I think it was, Keith. So, but I think it is clear from Derek and Bruce's point of view that there's an openness to listen as well, you know, that we can all sit back and expect somebody to come to us, perhaps offering ourselves up, can gain a little bit. 10,000 responses is really powerful to me. I mean, it's rubbish statistically from a finance point of view. I'm sure Councillor Jackson would pull his hair out if we're only looking at them sort of figures from a finance point of view. But statistically, from previous information we've asked from the public, it is positive. And I think if I go back to your first email, Bruce, that was a positive email sending out as well, because that started the ball rolling immediately for everybody to share that response from that day and to continue it on and to see that there's extra work being done. And I've had to applaud Derek, because we had a briefing off Derek on this report, and he was spot on with any question, any issues that were raised. He was spot on in his response and open to having any change in the future, which I think, again, having this as an open document which we can take information from and share immediately to residents, again, is very positive. I picked up one thing, Bruce, and apologies about this because we spoke yesterday about this. Are we happy about the offers an open opinion to equality and the levelling up within the report? I know we've got the prosperous green in Nottinghamshire, that sort of thing, and it sort of covers it. But I think that the taglines of the equality and the levelling up are what people are listening to. I'm going to be guided by you on that. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, I think I'd just say thank you, Mike, for that positive input. I think the value for money point is a good one, and it's worth noting, as Derek says, you know, it's not just those 7,000 responses, but 1,000 interviews, partner and stakeholder engagement, and still we hope more to come in terms of response in the coming weeks. And again, underline, you know, comms colleagues in the room as well as Derek's team, if we can make and perhaps go away after this meeting and make sure we are leaving no stone unturned in terms of how we're engaging with partners. You know, go back to districts, but leaders and chief executives of districts are having lots of conversations and very constructive conversations, and there's no reason we can't continue that collaboration all the way down the chain in terms of engagement with this as well. Bruce, did you want to come back on that?
Yeah, a couple of things really. One, Jason, I do make the point, Jason, that I did email everybody, all members. You could have passed the email on to your comms department for starters, you know, and got them to email all the residents. The same thing could have happened at Newark and Sherwood District Council. So, but we will take on board that. I mean, do I think 10,000 is enough? No, it isn't. I'd much double that, you know, or treble that. That's as aspiration. But what I have done, and what the group has done, is this is the first time that Nottinghamshire County Council has gone down this route. It's a learning exercise for all of us, really. We're writing down all the processes, all the partners, all our contacts, because this process will be used again. You know, we're doing it again and again and again, and we need to fine tune it and make it far more efficient than what it is. It's one of the reasons why it's taken a number of months to get the thing up and running and get it up, because it's not something that this council has really done efficiently or properly in the past ever. And so we need to take that on board. With reference to your levelling up issue, Mike, we've got to recognise is I am acutely aware that many of our new councillors are representing areas that historically Conservatives have never ever represented before, with issues in those areas and those divisions that are being brought to me on a regular basis by these new members, and it is a part and parcel, as Derek will attune to, you know, and Adrian, is that I am constantly onto them to make sure we are covering some of the issues, these issues that these members are bringing to us, and particularly in areas like Worksop, Mansfield, you know, that are just as important to me than some of the villages that I for example, represent. So yes is the answer. We are feeding that information in through, and from our initial responses when Derek first brought his plans to us, that we you know, when we first started, that was fed into the system straight away, because I am acutely aware that that situation has arisen as far as the election is concerned, and that has highlighted some of the issues that you're wanting to deal with.
Thanks, Bruce. Important point to note there. I think that we all have some responsibility here as councillors to share this around. So if you are, you know, twin-hatted with district councils, if you do sit on other boards or other organisations, and you can have that conversation and ask them to get involved and share this and help us to expand that response, then please do. Glenn.
Thank you, Chairman. Not to disagree with Bruce. I mean, I've been here since 1997. And certainly it's not the first time that this has been tried or done. It's been done by many councils. We've done all sorts of issues to try and communicate with the public at large better every time we've had a plan, or even when we entered a plan, when there's been an issue, whether it be on community safety issues or whatever. You know, we've had, was it County Contact 1000 that we used to have, and whatever the regular ones that we used to email everything about and do. So you know, so it's not the first time. It has been done over many, many years, and we try to get better every year, and we try to increase the numbers every year. But for whatever reason, it doesn't happen. I have a personal view about it. I in the sense recently, I think the issue about being distanced from the community is that we've got no base in a lot of the places. Yes, we've got libraries, whatever and ever, but we don't have what we used to. We had the county contact points that we had before. We had a bit of a base. We had somewhere. I remember the time when we used to have education managers based in locations that you could go to that would and they used to take a role of working with the district council leaders and be the conduit for conversations with leaders and chief executives at district level. A lot of that's gone. We don't have that, and I think that is, you know, that's been due to recently austerity, but also just general underfunding. So we've had to contract and we've had to look, which is why, in reality, there's very few places where, well, the only place now where you get is you dial in. You know, it's 0800 number, you know, 0300 number where you phone in to actually make contact with the county council. The leaflet that went out said you could do that on the survey, you could ring in. But I know that when they rang in, the response was, well, we don't know anything about the survey. No, we can't take your details. And it was only until a colleague of mine who chased it up with the county contact who said, yeah, we've dropped a bit of a boo-boo. We'll now put it in place because the system wasn't set up, although the leaflet got out. I've sent my leaflet out, Bruce, to people that I know, that I come into contact with, and said, can you circulate this? Because I think it's important. Whatever colours in power, I think it's important that we get to know what the public think and that they have an opportunity to contribute to the way and the shape of the council is and what services we can deliver. But it's difficult, and you know, I don't think 10,000 is good enough. I haven't got the answer, the solution, because we pay people, communications experts, to give us that advice. And you know, yeah, we've improved on previous years, you know, but it's still not great and it's still not good enough. But I think also, whilst ever we've not got that base within our local communities, I also think that makes it more difficult as well. I think it seems that we become more insular, that everything is based here, you know, and that's what the public, when you talk to them, you know, that's what they feel as well. So there is a job to do. I do agree about, you know, looked at some of the things. I think some of the key issues coming out is about, you know, and I know my colleague doesn't like us using it, the levelling up, whatever the terminology is, the levelling up and the equality. And I hope that strand runs through all the issues that are in there, because that's key, got to be key to what we're doing. I mean, we've been talking about special educational needs and the issues there, you know, so I'm hoping that strand runs through all that. I mean, that's basically it. I think we can only try. Other than the voluntary sector, I do have links with the local voluntary sector, and I haven't had anything from them direct, and I don't know whether there's anything that we can do quickly with the voluntary sector, who do have a lot of tentacles out there. And normally I would get an email saying, have you seen this? And I go, yeah, because I get it from county council anyway. I haven't had one this time. So I just wonder if we just do need to reinvigorate some of the messages that we've put out and say, can you do it?
Yeah.
And I hope that Councillor Girling feels really sad and told off that he didn't forward on to his colleagues in Newark the email that was sent him. Very disappointed in you, Keith.
Good, rightly so. Thank you, Glyn. I think I reiterate, as Derek nodded in the background there, we'll go away after this meeting and just make sure we are not leaving those stones unturned in terms of partners and external engagement, make sure that people are forwarding that wherever they can. So piece of work to be done between comms and Derek's office there. Yeah. So we've got all sorts of avenues that we've talked about exploring, and we need to make sure that we are exploring them. I think on the wider point, I can assure you that levelling up is on the agenda. I mention it every so often. In fact, my son, if you forgive the, even talks about it now. He gave me this wristband, which even says level up on it. So I literally wear it on my person every day. So it will be part of the theme going forward. Absolutely fair point about our distance from communities. And I think it's a process, isn't it? We can't just recreate that. We've got to rebuild that. And I think part of the reason around engagement is that feeling from residents, and I hear it all the time, see it on social media, people going, what is the point? Because it doesn't achieve anything. And we write in and we don't hear from you and we don't get it. And that's what we need to change, and to build that trust and that relationship with residents. And that will come about in a number of ways. Firstly, the fact that those who do email in will, I hope in the future, get an email back that says thanks and here's what we're doing with what you've told us, which will be a start. And as that base grows, we'll grow that audience too. But equally, we're having conversations both around wider collaboration with districts in particular, about front doors, about how we can make sure we have more of a face within communities, whether that is shared buildings and facilities, for example, or whether that is as simple as, joined up customer service function or whatever it may be. All those conversations are ongoing. Some of it will happen, some of it won't, I'm sure, because it requires everybody to buy in. But it's an active conversation, as well as we've mentioned investing in Nottinghamshire a few times here. But part of that is about making sure we've got the right facilities in the right places to be able to offer that service and support. I'm quite keen to tie all that in an effective way with our district councils too. Particularly, I use Mansfield as an example, but Mansfield District Council looking at new public sector hub in the town centre, and I want us to be part of that as well. So those conversations are all ongoing. I think there's this challenge of, those district services are in your face, bin collections and whatever, and as sometimes, unless you're actively involved in adult social care, you don't necessarily see it or see where that money and that investment goes. So I've asked comms colleagues equally to go out, talk to our staff, to talk to our service providers, get out there with the camera and do more to make sure we're putting across what our services do and where your funding goes, which I think is a positive way to go forward. But it is very much a journey. But a step forward and more than we've had previously is a good start. And we've got a lot more to do, absolutely. Gordon.
Thank you, Leader. It's not about backslapping, because if I recall correctly what you said earlier on, you actually thanked all members. You thanked officers, you thanked members of the community for their response to the survey. And it's great to hear someone like Councillor Guildford say he's done exactly what it says in the tin. He's gone out to his own communities. I'm sure we all have. So that's really very good. Now, Councillor Pringle, I think you referred to in percentage terms the response rate. Let me take you back. Some of you may not be aware of this. I think it even predates Councillor Barnfather's involvement on the Fire Authority. Some years ago, the Fire Authority consulted residents about closing their fire stations. Now, you think it can't get more emotive than that, losing your local fire station, or potential of losing a local fire station. Now, you'd imagine people in droves are writing, send in comments, circulars. I can tell you in percentage terms, what we've got in front of us was far greater than we had there. And that was after employing very expensive consultants. Cost a fortune in those days to get out there, send out the message and encourage residents to write in. I know what it's saying, and Mike is certainly not saying that 10,000 or whatever the figure is, it's wonderful or not. We were working to get that figure increased. But what would it be interesting, Derek might have some information to be able to get data on it, with comparable exercises done across other authorities, what was their response rate? I think you find, despite the criticism voiced at the response rate so far and the cost per response, we've done blooming well so far with that. It's very difficult getting people to comment in. And that's going to get better and better as we go out, following what you said this morning, Leader. Let's not be critical of what we've achieved so far. Let's be positive, as we are being most of us here today. Get that message out, continue to get that message out, look for other ways of getting that message out. But remember, what we've achieved so far is a good result, but we can get better. Thank you, Leader.
Thanks, Gordon, for that. Absolutely right. As I say, it's a journey and a good start and a lot more to do and learn from. I think it's worth, as I say, saying that we'd expect further responses as we go along, and therefore that value for money proposition improves with the more that we get. But incumbent on perhaps all of us to go and help with that as well over the coming weeks. Michelle.
It's more of a question than a statement, really. On the premise of the fact that we're all talking about tackling inequalities and levelling up, I was just wondering, Councillor Lawton, have we got a similar amount of responses from all areas of the county, or are there some areas of the county that are responding more to the survey than others? And if there are areas of the county, such as, say, Mansfield or Ashfield, where there are those higher levels of inequalities, are we looking at a different communication way of going into those areas? And is there something, say if it was Gedling, for example, whether I could do more as a member to get those people involved and get those voices heard? It's just sometimes we have certain people that will fill in a consultation or a questionnaire or a certain demographic. I'm sure, knowing the people in comms, it's all been analysed, having been involved with it in the past. But it'd be quite good as local members perhaps to know that information if we need to do a bit more legwork in those areas.
Let's make it competitive, Bruce. If your division's got the least responses, we want to know why. Derek, any answer?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Councillor Welsh. It's a good question. Obviously, the survey itself is kind of live, so we're getting responses in on a daily basis, several hundred a day at the moment. We're in the act now that we're several weeks in of starting to gather that information, because we'll have a meaningful number, hopefully across each patch around the county, to be able to then do a little bit of live analysis of are there some cold spots, if you like, around responses. So with the plan is that we'll do that over the course of the next week or so, as best we can, because of course it is a kind of constantly developing situation. And if there are cold spots, then we'll be able to pick up on those, and the support, any support the members can give us at a local level in engaging in particular communities or estates, for example, will be really appreciated.
Thanks, Derek. Bruce.
And just one final comment, really. I smile at the 14,000 responses on the from Newark and Sherwood District Council. The top response, number one on the list as far as local residents were concerned, was a Nottinghamshire County Council issue, not even a Newark and Sherwood District Council issue, which was highways. So there we go. That just proves the point, does it not?
Sure. Well, again, all we can do to gather that information from our district colleagues as well would probably be helpful around priorities and things they've already gathered. But can we make sure, Derek, that we circulate the list, perhaps the table of different divisions around to colleagues, and let's get people moving who are down the bottom of the list. Yeah, those who haven't been collecting their email database over the last few months and years will be made to pay. That would be great. Thank you. I'll come to Jim, and then again, unless anyone's got anything burning, I intend to move.
It'll be very quick, as Bruce has just nicked my last bit as well. It's more of a suggestion than anything else as well. I mean, at the moment, the Gedling is actually doing its survey. Ashfield has done one, I'm not sure when, and Newark is doing one. So I'm just wondering about the actual coordination of it, because I've actually received two in the last few weeks because of Gedling and that. So perhaps for the next one, we really ought to get hold of the districts first around now and say, when are you doing yours? Perhaps it could be a joint one, but at least time better, because you're going to get the situation with some people, I've just filled one in. I'm not doing that. I've already put my concerns in. And like Bruce has already said, the concerns at district might actually be highways. And I think it will be at Gedling as well, to be honest. So, yes, we actually do need to coordinate just a little bit better with the districts. We've been talking quite rightly about working together better, and the hubs are great. But you can actually get an overload of actually consultations with the people at times, especially if they're so close together. So perhaps just for the next time on the learning curve, just time it a little different, work together, whichever works out best. That's not for me to decide.
Thanks, Tim. No, I think that's absolutely right, and it's something we've picked up on already. I think PCC has done similar, and there's all sorts of things floating around. We absolutely should do these things together, as far as I'm concerned. We may as well have one Nottinghamshire thing that incorporates all of the local district issues as well, as far as I'm concerned. But that's a work in progress in terms of joining things up between different colleagues through our Economic Prosperity Committee. We've got structures to be able to do that, and we're starting to talk about exactly what work we can share and what things we can collaborate on better in future. But this kind of consultation is certainly one example of what we could do. If there's nothing further, then I'm going to move those recommendations and ask for all in favour of this report. Thank you. County Council Network Annual Conference, very exciting prospect. Historically, obviously there wasn't one last year. Historically, we've had 4 places: leader, deputy leader, leader of the opposition, and chief executive have attended the conference. This report basically says, can the usual suspects attend the usual conference? Very exciting. I don't know if there's anything to add to that, Anthony, or just crack on. Anyone got anything they want to raise on this particular report? Jason.
Thanks, Chair. This item and the next one both sort of fail to recognise the change of balance in the council somewhat. And though we're creating extra places for the administration, the third group, which is significant, get missed out on recommendations for East Midlands councils, for the County Councils Network, and other outside bodies as well. And given particularly, for example, I'm vice chairman of the District Councils Network, it might be useful for some of us to take some of that knowledge between the two, particularly as we're talking about working more collaboratively. But I'd just like to flag it does miss us out. We have 11 members, and that doesn't include other independents and other lines who are in this council, which are 3, which would make us larger than the Labour group if we sat as one, but we don't. But we still are representative of a huge number, some 170,000 residents. So I'm flagging that up because I think it's an omission that is historical and doesn't recognise the new chamber. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Jason. Oddly, we did predict that you might say that. Look, we have had that conversation with regards to the conference in particular. Historically, it has always been, as I say, in the structure of the council is as such leader, deputy leader, opposition, I hadn't intended to change that in truth, but recognise what you say about nature of the group and what have you. Happy to have that conversation offline. I know, obviously, recent conversations we've had about views on independent representation in various places. So let's have that discussion. All right. Sure. Anybody else? Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. There's a custom and practice, and you've already alluded to that in terms of who's attending the conference or who's being proposed should attend the conference in this case. But there is also an ethos, which is the one adopted by the Independent Remuneration Panel, in that you actually have an administration, a main minority party and a minor minority party plus another, and SRAs are predicated on that basis. And the whole ethos behind that criteria is you have a leader and a deputy leader of the council. If the leader walks under a bus, you've got a deputy leader that is suitably well informed. If this administration should fail, the most likely new administration would be the main minority group. And that's the criteria that the IRP worked to, and that's the criteria that we work to when we apportion places at conferences.
Thanks, Chris. Far more eloquently put than I had attempted. I will avoid buses at all costs. Yes. Yes, Jason.
I don't want to dwell on this conversation, and I appreciate Councillor Barnfather's point of view, but I don't think that's where I'm coming from. It's not going to be for another 4 years till I'm leader of the county council. It's a long time away. But I think in some seriousness, this is about information, and it's not about who's going to be next in line. This is about properly sharing information, and the CCN, East Midlands Councils, which is in the next paper, which we're creating an extra space for the administration or an extra nomination, which completely misses us out again. 3 Conservatives, 1 Labour at East Midlands Councils, or 2 Labour. But we're in a position where there are effectively 2 opposition groups. There's a Labour group of 15, and then there are other independents that are 16 members. And there's not a mechanism for sharing that information. So it's not about, there's no SRA, there's no money, there's nothing that we get out of it other than knowledge. And I just think we're in a different position where knowledge is a bit more collaborative than previously. That's all. It's not
Sure.
not about.
No, I recognise that. And as I say, we've had previous conversations about exactly that. And I recognise your point. I think, there are, if information and knowledge is the challenge, let's sit down in the next few weeks, and Kate also, and talk about how we fix that, because I keep talking about collaboration and I mean it when I say it. So the more, we can spread the knowledge from that perspective, I'm happy to. So let's, again, looking at James, I think we've got a leaders meeting in a couple of weeks anyway, where we can, yes, we'll sit down and we'll go through it. All right. Great. Anything further? Nope. Okay. I haven't proposed it. I was seconded it. So, Councillor Barnfather, are you proposing this report, given that I'm going and probably have a bit of a conflict?
More than happy to propose the report, Leader, but you've already stolen my thunder, so I'll leave it at that.
Fair enough. Thank you. And seconder for the report. Councillor Clark, do you fancy seconding my report?
I'd absolutely love to, Chairman.
Thank you very much. All in favour? We carried. We note there. All opposed? Or abstaining? One abstention. It's a very exciting conference. Yeah. Yes. Right. So outside bodies register is our next one. The main thing being that there are a number of organisations been removed due to no longer existing for the most part, and one in particular to be added to the East Midlands Freeport Board. The report reflects those changes. I'll ask Chris's business manager to move the report.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. The report's the latest update on the Council's outside bodies register. As the Leader's already indicated, it seeks approval for the deletion of 4 organisations from the register, 3 of which are no longer operating, and the 4th body being Marketing Nottingham and Nottinghamshire Limited. It also seeks endorsement for a previous action from the Team Manager Democratic Services to add the East Midlands Freeport Board to the register. The updated register reflecting these changes and a list of the appointments made is attached at Appendix B, and I formally move the recommendations which are on page 3 of this report. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much. Have I got a seconder for those? Richard.
Yes, Leader, I'm very happy to second the report, the recommendation, and reserve my right to speak.
Thank you very much. Any commentary on this? Noted your previous comments, Jason Sowell.
What does that mean, please? You've noted it.
Noted.
Are we making a change?
Was there a change you were suggesting?
Well, I think there are a couple, and I'd like to thank Councillor Barnfather for the work he's done with Councillor Deakin to give her the outside body that sits in her division. That's very pragmatic. I appreciate that. But again, look at things like East Midlands Council's County Council Network. I appreciate we've just voted on. East Midlands Council's 3 positions for the administration, 2 for the opposition. There's 5 positions there. Nothing for the independent group. And again, it's challenging for us to be in. I mean, East Midlands Council talks about some of the biggest economic work across the region, and we're not sat at the table of it. And I keep saying, if the numbers in this chamber are 15 Labour and 16 people who aren't Labour or the Conservatives, we don't get a place at that table. I think you should consider making it 2 Conservatives, 2 Labour and an independent group member. And I'd quite like to nominate Councillor Elizabeth Williamson for one of those positions.
She looks delighted.
Absolutely.
Look, I think from my perspective, as I say, I hear what you're saying. I'm more than happy to have a conversation. I wouldn't, because it will need to be a conversation about what goes where and who. I wouldn't like to jump on without consulting anybody in the group or anything. Just make a decision here and now. So my suggestion is that we pass the report as it stands, and then we stick this on the agenda for our leaders meeting, which I think is even next week or the following week. And no, absolutely. And I hope, we've had these conversations. I think I've engaged with them in good faith from that perspective, and we'll continue to do so. Chris.
Yeah, just a clarification, Leader. The East Midlands Council places there, the leader and the deputy leader of the authority. The 3rd place is to the chair of children and young persons, and there's a specific entity on the board there that person is appointed for. And the leader and deputy leader of the main minority group, without repeating the point that I made earlier. The terminology added place, there are no extra places. These are the places that have always been there. That's terminology of the East Midlands Councils itself. So it's the leader plus the added places as below. It's not that we've actually got more places this time than we had last time. And again, I refer to custom and practice and the fact that we have a main minority group. And I understand that Councillor Zadrozny is referring to all non-members of the Labour group and the Conservative group, but I don't think he can actually claim any ownership of the independents, the non-aligned, or indeed perhaps Councillor Carr as a Liberal Democrat. So I appreciate we all lies, damn lies and statistics, and we make numbers that suit our argument. but I'd just make that observation.
Sure. Thank you, Chris. I think that's the key thing for me, and the reason why I wouldn't like to jump into making decisions here without looking at it properly, because there are examples like that where people sit on committees for a specific purpose for us to feed in. And obviously, you know, if there are conversations at East Midlands Council about children and young people, it should be Tracy that's in that meeting, as opposed to, you know, a member of the opposition who might not be informed in the same way. So we do need to look at it properly. But as I say, we'll have a conversation. For now, we will plough on as per the paper. Anyone else want to speak? He's keen to delegate. He's got a few. Richard, anything to add?
Not really, Mr. Chairman, but as has been alluded to, a lot of these outside bodies are out of our control anyway. So we're going along with the respective policies of whichever bodies we're talking about. So we do have to bear that in mind.
Sure, there are many complications, different term lengths and times and all sorts of things. So less simple perhaps than it seems. For now then, all in favour of the report and recommendations? Thank you, I think it's unanimous. I am still here. I say and finally, but we've actually got two things to do. The first one is the work programme, which is there for members to have a look at. There is a couple of things been added, particularly highways, as we get kind of timescales in terms of when reports should come back. There is also a reason, as we've discussed previously, for a bit of flexibility with a number of key decisions to be made this autumn, not least the Freeport that we're about to discuss, integrated rail plan, devolution, and all sorts of other things that may want to come to this committee over the course of the coming months. So my own view is that rather than adding things specifically at this time, we should take things as they come over the course of the autumn. Has anyone got anything burning comments on the work plan, or we crack on? All happy? Right, all in favour then of that report. Do I need somebody to second that as well? Who would like to second that report? We'll just get on with it.
Formally second, reserve my right to speak.
We've voted on it. It's all on video, so we'll move on. Finally then, we come to agenda item 6 now, 13, whatever it may be, which is the East Midlands Freeport. The reason this has come back before the committee in short, before I ask Anthony to just talk us through it briefly, is that the deadline for the submission of the this particular stage, the first business case, is next week. The Freeport board meets this afternoon, and then again next week prior to the deadline to finalise what is a draft that we've seen as members. I point out to members that that is an exempt appendix. There are various commercial sensitivities within it. So if there are any particular points you want to raise about that business case in particular, please wait until we close the public part of the meeting, and we'll be able to do that. Officers will be able to advise us, I'm sure, if we veer into anything we shouldn't be talking about publicly. And I will close the public part of the meeting shortly. Anthony, can you take us through the basics?
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'll confine my remarks to the covering public report. When we move to the exempt appendix, matters of detail will pick up between Adrian Smith and I. And Adrian's been working on the business case as part of his support to the leader on the Freeport board. On the public report, though, can I start with an apology, please, to colleagues about the lateness of the circulation of the exempt appendix. The reason for that is that the timetable for the Freeport business case is driven by government and government rules. It isn't within the gift of the County Council, and the board that formulated the version of the appendix that you have received only met last Wednesday, and the report therefore was subject to revision and could only be circulated late on Friday. That's unfortunate because it's very detailed. I have talked to Adrian, and Adrian's going to work with colleagues in the Freeport programme. The accountable body for the Freeport programme is Leicestershire County Council, isn't Nottinghamshire County Council, to see if we can synchronise the publication or circulation rather of the full business case, so it's better aligned with policy committee timetable and gives us more time to brief members, particularly group leaders from other groups. It is possible that we might have to have a special meeting of policy committee if we can't synchronise the timetable. We won't know that until government has evaluated the outline business case following its submission on the 10th of September. When we understand what government think about the OBC, we can then start the clock on the final business case and work out how it fits with the policy committee timetable. But there is a commitment from the leader and I through Adrian to make sure that particularly group leaders are briefed in advance and that we give you a bit of a running commentary on how we get on between OBC and FBC. Now, having said that, the final business case is likely to be an iteration of the outline business case. It won't be a completely separate document, and you can see that this is subject to the Treasury guidelines on the way that we write business cases. So it's a standard format. It's very detailed. We'll talk about it in the exempt part of the meeting. But for now, on the covering report, I would ask members to consider carefully. Sorry, Jim, did you want to come in now?
Yeah, it's just because it's on the page, item 15, page 84 on the book, and it actually specifically mentions HS2. I'll just ask, without going into the book, how key or not HS2 would be, because that's actually somewhat up in the air at the moment.
I'm happy to cover that, Jim, as I take you through the report. So I would ask members to focus particularly on the recommendations, because in the context of what I've just said about the way this business case will be developed and submitted, it's important that we focus on the way that they're written. So first of all, you can see there will be a separate debate on the detail. Adrian's on hand to answer questions about that, but clearly there are some elements of the detail to be completed. There is a Freeport board meeting this afternoon. The leader is our representative at that board, supported by Adrian. If there are significant revisions to the OBC that is in the exempt appendix, then Adrian will come back through group leaders to inform you of anything that changes significantly as a result of this afternoon's discussion and before the OBC is submitted on the 10th of September. And then finally, in respect of those recommendations, note that what I've said about the FBC will hold true, assuming that government evaluate the OBC positively and the timetable sticks. If it doesn't, we'll come back and we'll let you know. There's no way of telling that until the 10th of September. Moving to your point, Jim, about alignment with other key infrastructure and economic development matters, there is no doubt that there is a relationship between the Freeport, particularly the Development Corporation, and you'll see from the exempt appendix that that matter is referred to and dealt with. We'll talk about that when the time comes. And of course, to a lesser degree, HS2. The Freeport programme and this Freeport bid can stand alone from HS2. The government's intention on the future of HS2 will be known through the publication of the Integrated Rail Plan. We expect, and the leader will know this as well as I, we expect that to be published sometime later this month, but they said that in July and June and May and April. So we'll see. It's probably getting to the point where that will become real now, Jim, and therefore the government's intentions around HS2 should be known before the final business case is submitted. And although there are loose interdependencies with how HS2 pans out, it's not a deal breaker. The Freeport can stand or fall on its own, particularly given the port of entry is an airport. And the connectivity out of the airport is very good for freight and passenger rail, even as it stands. And of course, the road networks are extremely good, sitting where it does, the confluence of the M1 and many other trunk roads. So it's important, but as I've said, it's not critical to the future path of this business case. And then finally, from me, it is important to note, colleagues, that the County Council, as I've said, is not the accountable body for this programme. So we don't bear any risk for the submission of the business case and the expenditure associated with that. And at the moment, there are no binding commitments for this council based on the submission of the outline business case. Between the outline business case stage and the full business case, if all goes well, there will be an 8-week period to get from one to t'other, it will become clearer as to whether there are any binding financial or other commitments for the council. And by other commitments, I also mean how this will be governed, and we'll come to that in the detailed discussion about the appendix. So golden rule is look at the recommendations because they're worded in a particular way to get us from where we are now to the FBC. And first principle is at the moment there's no binding commitment to this council. Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony. Worth reiterating, I think that what we're asking in this report is not a financial commitment. It's not a risk really from our point of view because we're not the accountable body for it. What we're asking is to endorse the Freeport bid moving to the next phase, effectively submitting the outline business case with a view to being able to then put that detail in during the next phase between now and November. Worth probably saying that not endorsing it therefore probably bins the whole thing. So given that there are no risk or financial commitments, I hope that we can move to that position fairly quickly. Is there anybody who wants to comment on this front page report? Otherwise we can move to the more complex bit. Dave, do you want to go first and then Jason?
You've covered partly what I was going to ask you the question on, but a recent Whitehall insider has said that the HS2B Eastern leg is going to be sidelined. How do you feel about that? And do you think that the business cases for the Freeport is significantly compromised by the lack of electrification of the East Coast Main Line?
I assume you mean the Midland Main Line, but Anthony's covered the HS2 point, but I think from Lovergood's Whitehall insider, but no decision has been made on HS2 as yet. I've got a meeting with number 10 about it on Monday, at which point I will know more. But the two are, as Anthony has said, loosely aligned. One would benefit the other, as with the Development Corporation. They are not dependent on each other from that perspective, so we take it forward regardless. On Midland Mainland point, we continue to make that case. As I understand, additional works are underway on electrifying more of the Midland Main Line on the way up the route, so making some progress from that perspective. Thanks. So in short, I think we're in decent shape from that point of view. Jason, I'll come to you next.
Thank you. I'll be careful not to stray into the purple papers there. But I think there's some, just while we're still in the public bit, and I assume somebody's watching, it might be useful for you to take an opportunity to clarify a couple of things, because I think, I mean, I'm supportive of the plans, but there's a number of think tanks like UK for a Change in Europe, and they said in March that, of course, this wasn't a magic bullet, and I don't think anybody thinks that, but one of the reports, and I think it's that one, so I'm not going to say it, talks about the creation of a huge number of jobs, which is something we're all supportive of. But I think there's a real danger about relocation of jobs. And I wonder whether you'd want to comment about if there's any early indications or figures about relocation of jobs rather than creation, and whether we've got any figures about either of those. And I think it might be useful for you to outline who you think are going to be the real beneficiaries, because there's a potential it's the super rich and businesses who can use the tax loopholes, tax breaks, that while the public bear the cost of the infrastructure, and what your views might be on the danger that we boost those three areas while taking jobs away from other places in Nottinghamshire that relocate to them. So I think while I'm very, very supportive, I think my concern is I don't want to see jobs relocated out of anywhere where they're valuable to us economically and go over there because there's a tax break. So I just wondered if you'd got some views. Do you want to take this opportunity to talk about, without straying into that paper, which does talk about it loosely?
Sure. I think worth noting, recognise those concerns, and they're been widely discussed. It actually is a requirement within the business case to lay out mitigations for those kind of things and plans as to how we will tackle them without straying into the more private bit. But absolutely right. It's a potential for great job creation. I think the package that I've tried to talk about around the Freeport Development Corporation in particular, which are very closely aligned, and then the potential around HS2, as well as other things, step fusion energy and other elements of economic development and growth that opportunities that exist around the county do tie together. I think some of the transport infrastructure that comes from the Toton developments in particular will benefit in terms of spreading some of those jobs and opportunities around the wider county. So there are implications, as I say, that benefit each other. There are a number of proposals in the work, regardless of what happens with HS2, about how we tie those things together. And again, transport and connectivity to the rest of the region forms part of the discussion with the Freeport board. My feedback into that board has been on a regular basis, along with Ruth Edwards, a colleague who also attends, has been around that levelling up agenda and how we ensure that those jobs benefit the places in the county that need them, not just the immediate area around those places. And again, there are mitigations within the report and to be discussed further and put in place through the more detailed business case around ensuring that these are jobs, new jobs, if you like, rather than moved jobs within the region. Anthony, I don't know if there's anything you can add to that within the confines of the public part of the debate.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Zadrozny and Chairman. So it's perfectly proper to talk about displacement in the context of the public report. That's fine. So there is a relative obsession in Treasury business cases about displacement, and particularly where there are enterprise zones or other incentives. And in this case, of course, there are potential customs and tax incentives. So, it's a double whammy. So the business case will have to tackle that. It's a proper, live and strategic issue. In mitigation, what I would say is the alignment with the Development Corporation is important because the Development Corporation takes a wider area view. And of course, the Freeport sites include sites in relatively disadvantaged areas in South Derbyshire. Add all of that to studies that we did in the Development Corporation, such as the Access to Toton study about how we would connect all the sites up and particularly ensure social mobility and movement of people from more deprived areas into the job opportunities. And hopefully there's a package there that does speak to social inclusion and social mobility, as well as providing incentives for landowners and industry to relocate. Hopefully not relocate from within the region, but relocate from elsewhere, including internationally. You're right to cite the evidence. I've read some of it. It also says that particularly in the early days, freeports are good at international relocation as well, which would clearly be a good thing, particularly given that it's an inland port. And what we hope to attract are high value manufacturing jobs, not just lots of logistics and warehouse jobs, no disrespect to people who work in those sectors. So there will be a lot of work to ensure we cover off displacement. I think we've got a reasonable head start on that because of the background that we did and all the research that we put into the Development Corporation business case.
Thanks, Chairman. We will be supporting that line business case. The timescales were incredible on receiving everything. I did read it, as I said to Anthony. Sent questions to Angie to report on it. And there's lists of concerns and issues that need clarification to be able to support this and see it recognised throughout the council. Shouldn't that be the case? I am slightly despondent at the HS2 position at the moment, because had that not been the case and we've been running on the assumption that that was being delivered, I think would have added support throughout Nottinghamshire to gel everything together, and would certainly have worked with Toton and the Freeport without question. So we'll have to wait and see how that goes. And we'll talk about some specifics later on. There's a clear opportunity for Nottinghamshire here, and there's a clear opportunity that we get it right. Again, I'm going to refer to the 59 days to shut down the board and reappoint a chair and reignite a board and then start the development company again. That in itself concerns me. So I'm going to need some guarantees or some assurances of stability as that moves forward, should anything raise its head after the event that we need to address. And the highways infrastructure, I won't go into detail, but again, I appreciate the risk to us is minimal, and I think we ought to applaud partners that are doing a lot of work outside of this council, south of us. There will be an impact on the public purse and the infrastructure, and that will be hopefully for the right reasons, because we'll all see delivery on that. So we will be supporting it, and in the exempt appendices, I'm sure we'll have some details that we can talk about. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, well, there are details of some of those things in that exempt section, and I'm sure we will come to them. I think on the wider HS2 point, you know, there are all sorts of rumours, aren't there? I mean, I've spent a lot of time making the case over the last few months about HS2, but more specifically about the benefits of Toten in particular. And my ask of government is whatever the wider IRP looks like, make sure Toten is involved in it and make sure that there is some investment there that we can hang our hat on to deliver our wider plans around Toten and all the connectivity that comes with it. It also makes the case, as you'll know, for things like the Robin Hood line. You know, if we're linking Robin Hood line, Maid Marian line to Toten, there needs to be something at Toten worth getting on a train for. So there is all sorts of interdependency there. But, you know, I can't preempt what that decision will be, but I think we've made a pretty strong case. And actually the rumours have changed slightly because of the case we've made around what might happen from that perspective as for further meetings about it. But I do think, as Anthony said, we're coming to decision point on that, and the machinations are taking place behind the scenes. So we will have a firm view on that, I think, before we come to final business case from a Freeport perspective.
Sorry, just as an also, I know you've got a meeting this afternoon. Does say that amendments can be made to the outline business case. If they are, can we be aware of them immediately so we're up to date with what's going forward to government? Thank you.
Yeah, 100%. Adrian and I think, are in that meeting this afternoon, and we'll feed back any amendments that come forward. Is there anything else on the public section of this document? If not, given what I've said, just from a purely practical perspective, rather than have to close the meeting and then reopen the meeting to have a vote, if people are comfortable with that on the basis of no financial commitment / risk for us, and not wanting to bin the entire Freeport projects, that we're happy to support it at this stage, and then we can discuss the detail rather than have to reopen again on that basis. So people are happy to vote. Great, let's do that then. In that case, have we proposed and seconded it? I don't know if we have yet. Great. So I'm happy to propose those recommendations.
Second the proposal, Jim.
Thank you, Keith. All in favour of that report? Fabulous. Thank you very much. Right, on that basis then, I'll draw the public part meeting to the close. I think I have to vote on that as well. So I suggest that the public be excluded for the remainder of the meeting on the grounds that discussions are likely to involve disclosure of exempt information described in Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, and the public interest in maintaining exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing information. Is that agreed by the committee? Yeah, all in favour? Thanks. Passed. Great. Thank you very much. In which case, can we turn everything off